All right, as you can see, we're actually the largest panel today. We have 5 panelists. My name's Tim Siglin. I'm co-founder of Transitions, Inc., a business and technology development firm, also a contributing editor for streaming media in the US and here in Europe. And we've done this panel before, and actually, to me, it's a very interesting panel, kind of like Eric's, where we take a look at the trends. But in this particular instance, we're looking at the platforms that drive some of the things that we were looking at in the infrastructure play. So I gave the panelists a series of 4 questions, and more like 4.5. We're going to run through those, and then we're going to open it for Q&A, probably have about 10 to 15 minutes of question and answer. The first question, from the time that we had met last year, so October 2011 to now, I asked each of the panelists to provide a quick verbal overview of what's changed in their server platform in that period of time. And not just what's changed in terms of features, but what features have been deprecated out of the systems and what features that had been add-ons have been merged into the system. For instance, Wowza, who's not on the panel here, has taken several of their add-ons and put it into the core server solution. So I'd actually like to go in alphabetical order in terms of the company. So I'm going to start with Adobe first.
Hi. So a number of things happened over the last year around our delivery capability, and what was the Flash Media Server has now been rebranded as the Adobe Media Server. And the reason for that is Flash is no longer the endpoint that it used to be. So previously, everything was focused in on that. Flash as the consumption model, and our servers were built to provide content for that.
So you're saying it's fallen from 97% to 96% penetration?
So the penetration figures are still as good as ever.
Okay.
However, there is a change in the consumption devices and the consumption environments, which is starting now to push out Flash. So the addition of our HLS capability as a main feature inside the server, and a switch from true streaming to HTTP streaming are probably the most important things that happened over the last year that reflect that change on the consumption device itself.
So besides the Flash name, what things have been deprecated out of the server?
So actually, not that much is being deprecated, but an emphasis has shifted from the RTMP, which is our traditional true streaming, over towards the HTTP. Okay. So that changes some things like DVR and rewind on a live stream is completely different to rewind on an HTTP stream. So those technologies have changed and shifted, but they're still there because they're understood terms, understood capabilities in the market.
Okay, all right, very good. Tristan?
Yeah, so our view is a software vendor, so we sell technology to telcos to enable them to build their own OTT headends and CDN, so we don't have our own formats. Right. We see everybody is fighting, and our job as a leader is to say that we work with everybody, and we can, James said something in the previous panel, we can take anything in and get anything out. What we've seen is that, of course, all the HLS, smooth streaming, and Adobe are still, nobody's dead, everybody's there, and different, in every telco is asking for that. We saw Google WebM dying, or at least not getting up, and 1 year ago, everybody was wondering if Google WebM was, so I think the choice of VP8 as a codec was a real problem for support. As a company, Anivia, we 1 year ago we were doing Dash prototypes, saying is it going to, and all the RFPs that we've seen from tier 1s and tier 2s were asking for Dash, so one of the work was to integrate Dash into the core of the product. And in the other trends that we saw is the emergence of all the catch-up and time-shifting services. So not only VOD, not only live, but a full experience.
Full spectrum. And we'll come back to the Dash thing in a bit. Yeah. CodeShop, so Arjen.
CodeShop, yeah, we do a software platform as well. It's named Unified Streaming Platform. What we've seen is that we try to support as many output delivery formats as possible. So that's basically what we've done last year. What we've seen this year is next to all the different playout formats is that now you have all the different DRM formats as well. So next to all the different DRM, actually the DRM systems, there is also a lot of different implementations using those systems. So it's not only just having 4 or 5 DRM systems, but it's having 4 DRM implementations for iOS, or it's different implementations for Android devices. And that's our main, that's been our main focus for the last year. It's multiple DRM systems.
So somebody had mentioned earlier that you supported a number of DRM types, and you mentioned that as well. Are you supporting all 5 of the common encryption scheme? I know Maria was talking about DEC, and of course as we get to ultraviolet, common encryption, Dash.
Most of the common encryption systems like PlayReady, Marlin, Adobe, we do not support Widevine.
Or Verimatrix.
Well, Verimatrix doesn't. It's more Verimatrix does the key exchange,
right.
But it's working
Okay.
with a similar.
All right, so you've got three of the what are considered the 5. All right, very good. Microsoft.
So our flagship media delivery product for the past few years has been IIS Media Services, which is what you would use to deliver smooth streaming from IIS servers.
Mm-hmm.
And we released a new version of that specifically for Media Room in the past year. You might hear it being unofficially referred to as a 5.0 version of IIS Media Services, but I think formally they're calling it the Media Room Component Technologies. And so it's basically just an updated version of IIS Media Services to enable linear TV scenarios with things such as DRM key rotation, for example. So on the on-premises side, that's our update in the past year. But really the big move has been to go from on-premises solutions to cloud-based solutions. And so we've spent much of last year moving a lot of the on-premises products that we've had to the cloud. So for example, Expression Encoder was our on-premises encoder. We're now developing a version of that in the cloud. We're taking all of the IIS Media Services features and putting that in the cloud as well. So that includes both like encoding as well as origin services, and then also we're taking PlayReady DRM encryption and putting that in the cloud as well. So back in April of this year, we released the preview version of Azure Media Services, and then sometime by the end of this year, we will have the final version ready of on-demand services in the cloud.
So quick question on the Expression Encoder, even though it's not necessarily part of the server, because you're moving it to the cloud with Azure, what happens in terms of product lockstep between the online version and the desktop version? Do you deprecate Expression Encoder on the desktop?
I would say it's developing to slow down probably on the premises side. On one hand, because it's reached a level of maturity where we don't get as many feature requests anymore, and on the other hand, because we feel that there's a much bigger business opportunity in the cloud. And obviously, there's also the question of resources internally, where we can't have everybody working on everything all the time. So
maybe the more direct question is Dash, from a standpoint of the on-premise encoder.
Sure, yeah, I think we'll make some key updates probably for things like Dash and UV, but I wouldn't expect much more for the development on the on-premises
So
side.
product enhancements in the cloud and Azure. All right.
Exactly, yeah. That's the chief investment right now.
Okay, great, fantastic. And last but not least, Real.
David Smith, Rail Networks. Yes, the Helix Media Delivery Platform is not just a server, it's an end-to-end development where we have encoder, server, and SDKs for Android. We've done quite a lot in the last 12 months. The most important thing, of course, is Dash. We've implemented both types of Dash for MPEG-2 transport stream and for the MP4 format for smartphones, tablets, and PCs. We have an SDK for Android, retrospective fit to Android 2.2, so we can provide you with an end-to-end delivery of Dash. If you want Dash right now, we can give you that solution today. We've enhanced our DRM technologies. We've done some very close work with Verimatrix in the last 12 months. We've implemented their VCAS inside our Helix server, so we can talk directly to Verimatrix and deliver Verimatrix encrypted streams over HLS right now, looking at Dash as we move forward. We've also improved on the ingest side of our server. Traditionally, we've worked with Microsoft Expression Encoder, Windows Media 9 and 7 encoders before that. But now we work with this guy. So we work with the R2MP flash encoders. So all the guys that make flash encoders, we work with those too. We've also added MPEG-2 transport streams and ingest. So for wherever you are, whether you're building private or public, delivery. We have everything inside the server to take something from a source and get it out to another source. So we can take H.264 and get you to Dash, to HLS, to RTSP, multi-rate RTSP as well. So that's really important for the industry. So we've got a lot of work in the last 12 months and a lot more work ahead of us.
Okay, very good. So the second question is, what business opportunities or vertical markets have you been able to address with some of the enhancements? And I'm quite curious to hear your perspective of kind of not having a server, but I'm going to start with Alex at the far end and kind of work back this way.
I think with the move to the cloud, primarily what we're trying to address is lowering the cost for customers and scalability. I think with on-premises, there's always a very high sort of upfront cost of building out the infrastructure. And so we're trying to lower that by essentially offering to a lot of customers who don't have the resources or the ability to go and build out their own infrastructures, the ability to perform services such as encoding and serving of media in the cloud instead. And that gives them the ability to essentially scale up and scale down according to need. And that's a big deal because even a company that has the resources to go, for example, deploy a bunch of origin servers and a bunch of encoders may not need all the capacity all the time. And so being able to spin up additional resources in the cloud when they need it and then not use it when they don't need it is actually a big deal. And then in terms of differentiation, for example, from other cloud services, the opportunity there is that whereas for example something like AWS is really infrastructure based, we're trying to build a platform as a service offering with Windows Azure Media Services. So we're trying to say we're going to take care of worrying about how it actually works behind the scenes. All you have to do is just call APIs and make sure that you call in the right APIs, but we're going to take care of spinning up VMs and installing the right software and all that stuff.
So what's the sweet spot in terms of companies, the amount of encoding they need to do? Because you mentioned companies that might be able to afford to do on-prem using you kind of as the adjunct, but what's kind of the sweet spot, bread and butter that you expect to see in terms of companies that would use the Azure Media Services?
So primarily we're going after companies that are doing a lot of large, high volume encoding. That's, I think, our first goal. But I think as some of these services become commoditized and their price point goes down further and further, then they will become available, I think, more to the mid-tier companies, and then we'll see a lot of long-tail content, I think, being encoded through the cloud as well. There's already a lot of services, of course, running already in the cloud, like encoding and Encoder, that provide a lot of services that are being used, but for long tail. But I think on the large scale, there's really nobody, I think, that has the capacity, like for example, like Windows Azure does, to handle really, really high volume encoding.
Okay.
And so that's what we're trying to tackle first.
All right, Arjen, what have you seen in terms of opportunities? Obviously, you spent time in the DRM, as you said.
Yeah, I think that's the main opportunity. Is what we see is a lot is that people are looking for delivering their content securely, but they really need to have multiple DRM systems in place. If they want to deliver to multiple platforms, then you often you can't really get away with one DRM system. And offering the ability to actually apply DRM at the last stage, at the end, and apply DRM on the fly, makes it very easy to choose at the last minute if you want to play out to the different DRM systems. And it saves you as well. It's changing the DRM options at the end, or changing the DRM system at the end. You don't have to re-encode all your content again. You can just have one format, the common file format, for example, and then tag on later the different DRM systems. So it makes it very easy to change DRM systems or add a different DRM system, depending if it's like cost effective. If suddenly next year it's more, things get more expensive and another solution is a better option, then it's very easy to change at the end. You don't have to change your actual encoding and everything before that. It's only at the play out side that you have to do it.
So what kind of market verticals would you see taking advantage of that opportunity besides what we would think of traditional media and entertainment?
I'm sorry?
What kind of market verticals besides, say, the traditional media and entertainment premium content would you see taking
premium
advantage?
Content, it's the catch-up TVs, the broadcasters.
All right. DJ, Reel, if you spent time on Dash, are you seeing Dash opportunities?
We've certainly seen Dash opportunities. People, if you've got HBB TV in France, Germany and Spain, and that's where people are looking at how do we do that? So that's one of the areas we're certainly focusing our time on right now in terms of business development. But if you look at the last 12 months, most of our work is a very similar story, really. The DRM, where content owners are going over the top. They've now come to the realization they're using Hollywood movie studio content, and it needs to be protected. So we're working very closely with Verimatrix, who already have customers who want to go over the top, and you can't do it over the top with RTSP devices because there isn't a DRM technology that works. So we're working with them because we have an Android SDK on one of their partners. We can provide an end-to-end story with Verimatrix for both our server and our Android SDK, which ties the whole thing together. So it's a very similar story to what you've got there. But the multi-DRM is certainly an area we see going forward that we need to spend a lot more time on.
So, in the early days, there was the Real Broadcast Network, which would have been in the pre-cloud days. Is there a cloud play for Real as well?
Yeah, we can run in the cloud. I mean, it's just server software. You can just fire it up under a virtual machine anywhere you like. It's how you build your infrastructure, whether you want to host it yourself, co-location, shared hosting. It really depends on where you are. I mean, you've got things like Azure, which is a slightly different way of doing things. So you just build a big data center in the sky, as it were, and on the cloud, and people go and hire it as they need it. We're more about you use that technology yourself, and you figure out and integrate it with your own web services, your subscriber management services, and all those things, content management, and you piece it together, and we can be part of that.
Okay. All right, very good. Steve?
So 2 areas, I think. I mean, first is the workflow efficiencies, and as we've heard, the just-in-time compilation and fragmentation and encryption makes a much easier workflow. But we're also going sort of up and down that. So we have Amazon Cloud Service for FMS, but we've also gone down the stack and put our DRM and delivery technologies into encoders as well. At the end of the day, when you encode, fragmentation is a logical thing to do at that point in time, hence moving down the stack. That makes the workflow much easier, but it also starts to change the economics of your delivery system. If you have origin caches, what the BBC did in the Olympic, you have an origin cache which they own themselves, then getting CDNs to pull from that is a much easier option than trying to feed through to the CDNs and then get them to replicate and everything else. So the whole modern architecture starts to change, and that can offer some really great advantages. So delivery workflow is sort of one half of where we see the opportunity. The other side is actually the monetization of it. Proper ad insertion around video delivery. And HTTP, of course, lends itself to that. If you've chopped up the video, then inserting fragments of ads inside that becomes a logical thing to do. So we've got ad serving capabilities. We have fragmentation capabilities through AMS server. So we're very focused now on also making that monetization capability much, much simpler. Part of the workflow with no change in what you'd normally do if you use our technologies, but starting to get much more targeted ads, much more relevant ads to right device, etc. So the monetization aspect becomes just as important as the quality of delivery aspect.
Okay, very good. Tristan, you have a choice of all of these guys plus Wowza.
I'll pick that.
So what do you, from the opportunities that you've seen or see potentially going forward, you mentioned Dash, obviously, in the RFP approach. What other things, as they've added to their server solutions, have you seen as opportunities?
Well, in general, we see that that some telcos or broadcasters have built, started to build a delivery system. They started with iPhone HLS, starting to do something after the legacy Adobe, a bit of smooth streaming, and now Dash is coming. So everybody is, of course, lost with all these formats. And the trend that we see and the good opportunity for software vendors like we are is to build and to mutualize everything and try to build a consistent headend, a consistent CDN, of course, consistent DRM system. So our job as a software company is to reassure and to be nice to telco and say, don't worry, we take care of everything. But of course, it's a lot of work. The other trend that we see is around we are a French company, but we operate in Europe, Middle East, and Latin America. And in Europe, there is the HBB TV standard based on the
/TNT 2.0.
Yes, exactly. So it's connected TVs, and now everybody is talking about connected TVs. So they want to build another infrastructure for connected TVs, but one other new strong driver for all the industry. It's very positive, of course.
All right, very good. And speaking of HBB and TNT 2.0, that kind of leads into the next question I had around Dash. At IBC, there was this buzz, and we wrote some articles around it that seemed to be fairly popular on the site around were the French mandating that Dash, effectively Dash 264 was required in connected TVs. Again, you don't have a server, but what do you see in terms of Dash that are the issues that we're going to face over the next 18 months in getting it implemented? One thing I've heard is players, of course, is a huge issue.
There is a VLC player, which used to be my project a few years ago.
Okay.
So that's why I promoted the implementation of Dash in VLC.
Okay.
The main problems first is that Dash is not Dash, it's Dash TS and Dash MPEG 4.
Right.
So I think you know who will be the winner, because you worked a lot about TS between MPEG 4. But this is one problem, the lack of players. There is no Dash TV, connected TV, as we are talking right now. So
There is a player in Samsung.
in Samsung, okay.
Yeah.
So
It's only VOD. right
okay.
now.
And is it only is it only MPEG 4 or is
MPEG
it
TS.
So it's TS.
Yeah.
It's
Interesting.
TS, okay.
All right, Steve. Dash implementation. Of course, you guys are part of the promoters group, but there's also the legacy of Flash, and there was some hesitancy early on to kind of go fully behind Flash. But then, of course, the interop tests that were done, or they really weren't interop tests, the linear tests that were done around EVU and VRT for the Olympics.
Yep.
Some of your prototype players were used. Do you see players as a huge issue, or do you see other issues for Dash implementations?
Getting a player out there in sufficient numbers is the biggest problem. We have committed to MPEG Dash. We've shown demos of it. Microsoft and others have said that we're going to share the same profiles, blah, 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 such to make it simpler. But it's the player at the end of the day. You have to have a player there capable of doing these things. So where we will change our player technologies to support that, and our legacy stuff as well. Frankly, that will help, because we do have a lot of people adopting our technology when we update it. But yeah, I think that's going to be getting a player out there is the biggest issue. Getting a player on devices is an even bigger issue.
And will the player that you update, especially since you have the 97% penetration by some numbers, will it have TS and FMP4, or will it just focus on the effectively Dash 264?
Yeah, so I don't think we've decided fully on that. The MPEG 4 is probably the no-brainer route for us. TS, we're still weighing that up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. DJ, from a real perspective, what are the issues with implementing Flash?
Well, we've done the implementation on the server side, so we've got both types, the TV stuff and the smartphone stuff. So we've got both of those, and on the Android operating systems, we actually have a media player. So we have an SDK. If you build a Java app today, you can embed our SDK, and you can play MPEG Dash. The challenges we see going forward are predominantly around DRM. So coming back to what this guy was saying in co-shop, DRM is going to be important. If you're going to do over the top, you're doing that over the top now with DRM, you're going to have that in Dash. So it's up to all these DRM vendors to, even like guys like you guys, to start getting your specs out there, so people like us who are going to put the tags on the playlist know what to do, so we can get the encryption in there and get the end-to-end story coming through. But beyond that, it's things like ad insertion, putting ads in the video stream to make it monetize it much more easily. Things like subtitling, closed captioning, those things that we have right now in certain players, like GW Player, for example, has all that capability in the Flash environment, but we don't have it in the MPEG Dash environment. So those are important. We've got to figure those things out, how to get them from a live perspective, more importantly, than from a VOD perspective. VOD is easy because it's just firing HTTP stuff at a player, but live is more hard. How do you get translation on the fly happening, as it's coming out? Do you read the TV stream or an MPEG-2 transport stream and pick it up? So those are the challenges we see, and we think that's going to take 12, 24 months. And again, as Steve was saying, distribution of a player on the PC platform is important.
Right.
So we're hoping guys like Microsoft with IE, Firefox, all these guys, Google Chrome. Now I know Google Chrome have got a project around Dash kicking around in the vaults there. Those things, if they come out in the browsers and start using HTML5 video tags, that will really help the entire market, because then you don't need third-party players, it's in the browser.
Somehow I don't think the Google project with Chrome is around WebM as a Dash profile, but I may
Yeah.
be wrong.
But there is a project in there for
Yeah, no,
MPEG Dash. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
I want to come
WebM
back.
is, yeah, I think WebM is RIP.
Okay, you heard it here.
Yeah.
I want to come back real quick, Steve, to a question I meant to ask you. HDS versus Dash. What happens to HDS in the Adobe Media Server?
So technically speaking, HDS is awesomely close to MPEG Dash anyway.
Mhm.
So it's a minor changeover as far as our engineering is concerned, and we'll just roll HDS in
Okay,
as part of HDS. Yeah, that's part of MPEG Dash. Yeah.
all right, good. Arjen, what issues, I know you and I talked at lunch about players and kind of getting players that implement across the full spec or just partial specs. What other issues do you see in the implementation?
Yeah, I think that's the main issue. It's like for us doing the server side end of things. So we actually create the MPEG manifest files and then the segments and all that stuff. We can pretty much generate everything according to the spec. And if we need stuff from the spec, like for subtitling or additional audio tracks and anything like that, we can implement it because it's being specified in the specification. The problem is on the player end, we don't know if the players will actually support all these things that are mentioned in the specification. And what we already see is that the specification started out with specifying 2 profiles, so MPEG TS, MPEG 4, and then there's the VOD profile, a live profile for each, so that's already 4, and then there's an additional one main, which is 5.
Right.
And then HBB TV has an additional profile with an additional set of requirements. Dash 264 is an additional profile. So we already have like at least 7 or 8 subsets or profiles of the specification. And yeah, not at this time, not all the players will actually support all these different profiles. And that makes it difficult for people to choose which profile they will actually play out at the end. If they pick MPEG TS as the base format, then there are probably at this time not many players that actually support that, because the focus has been on MPEG 4, and that will make it, at this point in time, it's already difficult to pick the correct profiles. I think it will be more difficult in a year's time. There will be even more profiles. So
Okay.
that's what we see as the main.
And Alex, I know you're going to talk a lot about Dash in a little bit, so I'm not going to ask you that question because it'd be redundant to what people will hear later. But
I can still answer.
yeah, I know you can answer it in that part. We're a little short on time, so the last question that I've got before we open it up for Q&A, and this was a question that I asked last year and got some really good responses on. What are the 1 or 2 feature requests that you hear consistently from customers that you've not yet implemented into your server that you'd like to see implemented? And I'll start with you.
So Dash will obviously be the first one. We don't have it implemented yet, but we're hoping to have at least some basic Dash functionality on the server in the cloud version that we're going to release by the end of the year. But I would say the other one would probably be on-the-fly encryption.
Okay.
So both for on-demand content and for live content, the ability to encrypt streams on the fly so that you don't have to actually store encrypted streams on the server or encrypt them in the encoder.
And I would assume more than Play Ready or just Play Ready?
Probably starting with Play Ready, but then extending to other DRMs as well. But that's, I hear that asked for pretty frequently.
Okay, all right. Arjen, what about you all? What do you hear?
Subtitles.
Okay.
For all the different, maybe we can have subtitles work perfectly fine, for example in Silverlight smooth streaming, but on iOS devices the subtitling is, it's possible, but it's not very friendly and straightforward, and we get asked for that a lot.
Is it any easier to do subtitling with a new indexing or indexed files model that the HLS is implemented? Before we obviously had to break things down into thousands or tens of thousands of TS files, and now the indexing capability. Is that?
It doesn't matter. We already use it as a virtual file. So on server side we have one file, but actually when the iPad requests different chunks, it's already one file, so that makes no difference.
Okay.
It's just a subtitling format itself, which is based on the very old specification, which is then in MPEG in an MPEG 2 transport stream, which is far away from the nice subtitling format specified like DTML or DFXP, which is a nice XML format with different font sizes and graphics and everything.
Sure.
So
I sort of remember that Real was one of the companies with the smile file concept. Yeah, so he's being nice. He's saying, the legacy stuff that we had to deal with. So what about you guys? What do you see in terms of
subtitling? We
implementation?
always see that. It's the lack of standards in that, which has always been a bit of a problem. So who do you develop for? Which player? Because on iOS you've got two. You've got the HLS version 5 spec, which has now got a nice standard or a nice specification to work with. The previous one was a bit rubbish, and it didn't really work so well. So we're looking at that certainly for iOS devices. MPEG Dash, we're certainly going to look at that because we'd like to see some standards. I mean, Real's always been an advocate of standards. We standardised RTSP in 1998. We're now standardising MPEG Dash in 2012. So finally we've got a standard for delivery, which means we can start to add value in the media players. Because every time you reinvent the media player, you reinvent the transport, you go through this whole cycle of having to do the stuff you did before, like Smile, we did in 1998. Did all this stuff you talk about now back then. If we'd kept it that way,
if we'd kept it that way, Real would have owned the world and we wouldn't be having this.
Well, maybe that's true, but that aside, but we wouldn't have to reinvent all these things. So subtitling is one area we really need to look at. We do like to see standards, and if that can come around. The multi-DRM, which is, that's a request we see quite a lot. And we also now server-side playlists, the ability we have now to create playlists for different devices. People want to see it integrated directly into advertising systems, fast compliance. So just directly picking up a feed and sending it out. So those are kind of three things we see a lot being asked for.
Okay, very good. Steve, Adobe.
Yeah, so we've finally done subtitling at last. Probably the one that we get asked for most is dynamic re-encoding of content.
Okay.
So a lot of people are very interested in doing dynamic bit rates, bit rate switching, all that kind of stuff. But actually, you need to have multiple versions of the files for most systems and for our system. So having the ability to do a re-encode, like we can do a re-transcode for HLS, is something that a lot of people ask for.
Interesting. All right, very good. I'm not going to ask you because you don't have a server. But I want to open it up for questions from the audience. Go ahead.
I'm wondering if the whole Dash topic is a hype or is really necessity behind it, because the HLS technology is on iOS, clear. We heard this works also on Samsung TV.
Also works on Android that nobody uses.
Also works on Android. It's
3.0 and
4.0, I think. And it works on YouTube. So I'm wondering, is it really necessary to invent a new standard like Dash? If yes, what are the reasons? What are the arguments?
Okay, hold up for a second. One thing when you do your presentation that I'd like to hear about is when we're looking at the HTML5 video tag, which of course Ian Hickson had said we don't have a decision, but if we ever come to a decision, then we'll make that. We'll implement that. I'd like to hear whether you feel like we're close enough to that to go back and begin reconsidering a single video tag. That's tangential to what he's asked, but I'm just curious to get feedback on that. All right, Steve, it sounded like you were chomping at the bit to say something on that particular one.
Yeah, so you're right, HLS is appearing everywhere, and Android mobile phones, that kind of stuff, having hardware decode for HLS sounds ideal. And it is for simple video. One of the problems with HLS is that it's an old spec. So things like metadata inclusion, things like captioning, things like, it's difficult to do anything intelligent, if you like, with that format as it is. If it got a rewrite and became modern enough to handle these other things, then I think it will be a contender. But as it stands at the moment, the spec isn't flexible enough, I think, for a lot of use cases outside of pure just consume and watch video.
Yeah, I think to that point, when you look at the HLS spec, the HLS spec was sort of a quick and dirty spec, I think, to get the job done.
Right.
The playlist itself is based on the Winamp playlist format, so it was not designed to necessarily be the best and most universal delivery format. It was really designed to deliver adaptive streaming media to iOS in the easiest and sort of cheapest way possible. And I think the reason why we're seeing so much HLS usage out there is not necessarily because people are going to it and saying, well, this is the format I want to use because I evaluated all format and this one came on top as the best design format. People are using it because that's the way to get to iOS devices. I mean, that's the number one reason.
Sure. I actually, just to add to that, before the Dash spec was ratified, I did what I thought was sort of a major coup. I got Adobe and Microsoft to both co-sponsor a paper on fragmented MP4, which is kind of the precursors to Dash. And one of the things that we talked about in the paper, as Alex alluded to, is kind of just, you know, the thrown together nature of the fact that HLS isn't really even MPEG-2 transport stream, it's a derivative. To me, and this is just a personal example, I come out of the motion picture world. In the 20s, we went to 24 frames a second in the States, 25 frames a second in Europe. The reason we did that was the highest number of frames we could do at that given time. And it was the lowest number of frames that we needed to get persistence of vision, which is what you need to be able to get the sense of motion picture. Even today, as we're in digital cinema, we're still stuck at 24 and 25 frames a second. So we made a decision at that point. And if you think about iOS devices as movie projectors, there became so many of them that there was never a cost-effective model to move to 30 frames a second, 48 frames a second, 60 frames a second. At IPC the last 2 years, there's been discussion on, do we go beyond? Yes, there's the possibility to do that now, but we really have been stuck in a mentality for almost 100 years on this. That, frankly, is my fear with HLS, is there's so many devices that it becomes de facto on some level. So, other questions?
Yeah, I'll stand up to the behind here. I really like the focus on Dash, and I think that's really important as a convergence and sort of general scalability for the industry. But I've heard, so again, in this panel, on-the-fly encryption was talked about, and also I think Steve talked about encoding chunks at the encoder, creating chunks at the encoder, which, while I can see some benefits, has an inherent issue of it causes the input-output seeks of the disks to increase on the origins. So my question to you guys is, in your positions, to what extent do you work with the rest of the delivery industries and the workflow industries and distribution agents to ensure that we're creating scalable and efficient technologies?
Maybe I can answer this one. Our job as Anevia, we started in OTT like 3 years ago. We come from IPTV, and we started getting business and big orders on OTT from packaging, you know. So encoders delivering H.264, and after that, the packaging converting one H.264 into multiple formats. And what we see is that all this packaging feature is moving in the network, because in the CDN you don't want to have the same content encoding in HLS, smooth streaming or Dash or whatever, given the fact it's the same H.264, so it's a nonsense. You don't want to have 3 times the storage. So at the same that we don't want to encrypt 3 or 10 times, we don't want to store, and we don't want to package 3 or 10 times. So our vision is that all the on-the-fly packaging and on-the-fly encryption will move slowly into the CDN, and that's what telcos ask today.
So they're asking to move out towards the edge?
Yes, yeah. We used to be in the head end providing packaging, and people pull us out and want to put our technology in the CDN.
Interesting. Anybody else?
It's interesting because we're moving out of the CDN.
Thanks for leaving the room.
So I think also there's a difference here. Not all video is the same, so it depends very much on what you're talking about. Live stuff, doing it through the encoder, fantastic, probably the quickest way. Video on demand, difference between a short form and long form. So it depends what video you're talking about as to where that should happen. And I think there are valid cases for doing it at different places depending upon the kind of video that you're putting out there. Hence why we work with the encoders on one side, and the CDNs all have massive of our servers at the other end. There isn't a single solution that's going to fit for everything. It depends on the nature of your business model and the content you're delivering.
Anybody else on that one? All right. One more question. Dom?
Licensing. Clouds. Yeah, I've been trying to at various times talk to various different providers about cloud pricing for a service that you use for an hour. And it's not an established model yet. None of you have mentioned it.
And I would add
Curious about
virtualization to that as well.
It's like, tin is dead. Anyone building on tin is mad these days, and this is a 24/7 infrastructure. And most things going on are ad hoc. So it's almost impossible to ring up any of your companies, probably Arjun, I would imagine you're agile enough as a size to be able to be an exception to that. But it's very difficult, I know for Adobe, I know for Microsoft, to ring up and say, how much for an Adobe server for 15 minutes for 24 hours for, you know? Why is this not something people are asking for? The clouds are getting busy, clouds are actually an economic thing, not
But Dom, the reality of life is you only use a streaming server like that when it's a live event. Once you've got the live file and you've got the archive, what are you going to do with it?
Okay, so I've got an infrastructure with something in the room which we sometimes launch 700-800 servers for an hour to do some live encoding.
Live encoding?
Live
stream.
serving, live
see,
encoding
yeah.
and all sorts of different
Yeah.
elements. And it's, you know, it's £1,000. We buy 700 times £1,000 and then turn them all off an hour later and buy another server. There is no easy way to do that negotiation.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
something that's not mature in the service space, and I'm intrigued that.
yeah, I mean, from our perspective, what we normally see is we used to do time limited licenses. If you use a license for a month, say for example, you do your live event, and then you've got the archive file, and then you typically want to serve that afterwards as a post video, post archive. So what you found is that that event that may have only lasted a week was actually the streaming server was active all the time thereafter because they wanted the archive. And as they added more to it, they kept adding more and more to the catalogue. So the streaming server eventually became a perpetual instance rather than a live instance. I can see the instance where you want additional capacity for a short period of time to do a live event, and that's kind of what the CDN would do. You push the stream up, and then they take care of the heat. And once you've got the archive at the end of that, then you place it on your own streaming server, and it's there as a post archive.
So someone like Yaroslav, who's got a CDN establishing himself in Russia, is going to go out and just have to buy as many server licenses as his peak, or are there flexible models coming out?
But I mean, as a company, we're very flexible. If you're building a CDN and you want to build it on Helix, you tell us what you plan to do, and we can figure out, the price for that, what it should be. So
it's a long way from a la carte.
Yeah, it's a long way from a la carte, but it's more about trying to do a bespoke fit for what people want.
So Alex, as Azure kind of comes up, and you mentioned AWS, that other servers run on is instances. How do you deal with this kind of issue?
So one way we're trying to address that exact problem is by building a platform as a service, which means that you no longer have to think about it in terms of how many servers am I spinning up, how many cores. You really start thinking about it more in terms of how many hours of service did I use. And so you might get billed, if let's say that we're talking about live streaming in particular, you might get billed for the actual live origin service, and then you might get billed for storage, you might get billed for CDN cost, right? And those are 3 separate costs. But the actual cost of something like Windows Server licenses would just get kind of, basically hidden by the other cost. It's swallowed up by the rest of it.
Is there a way to drive it down to a single price, though, as opposed to having to split out these 3 different pieces? I mean, I understand transport, I understand storage, I understand.
I think ultimately get presented to you. You'll be charged, obviously, just sort of one single price. You might be able to break that down into 3 separate items just to see where the actual bulk of your cost is going. But we're trying to have centralized billing in Azure so that you're getting just a single bill from Azure.
And you mentioned that at some point the price will drop enough that mid-tier companies will begin to look at it. Dom gave a number. Where do you expect we'll be? How long will it take us to get to mid-tier?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think we're actually more looking towards the industry to tell us what that middle point is.
And I know telcos have traditionally had the model when they built services is they would build the service bespoke for somebody, but charge them as if it had been up and running for 2 years because effectively they assume they could sell it to a bunch of other people. I mean, will Microsoft charge a premium to get the build cost back quickly, or will we see kind of a more stabilized pricing model?
I'm not sure yet at this point. I think it's too early to tell.
All right, good deal. All right, we apparently Dom found coffee this morning, but this afternoon is a tea break, so we've got a tea break for the next 20 minutes. And
What Tiffin was in this country, so.
all right, a round of applause for our panel, please.